Hi everyone, and welcome to Week 9's Deepen Your Learning video. This week we are talking about human evolution. Your text says the following, and I'm going to repeat it here. Most people readily accept the relatedness of living things like bacteria, plants, fishes, and mammals. Strangely, some religious people are strongly opposed to the relatedness of humans to other organisms. These individuals believe that God created all living things, but for some reason they want humans to be separate from God's other living creations, organisms like chimpanzees, elephants, dinosaurs, and fishes. So let's explore that idea. Specifically, I want to look at what things we should see, what evidence we should see if humans have indeed evolved from other organisms. The first type of evidence that we should look for is that aspects of the human body are finely tuned to specific functions. In other words, due to evolution, we have developed certain traits that allow us to perform certain tasks. To see evidence of this, basically, you need to look at any part of our body and you can find an example of how we're finely tuned to perform specific functions. They can be things as basic as walking or breathing air, or they can be specific things like decision making, using precision tools, communication, and things like that. The second type of evidence that we can look at is that the human body will share many traits with other organisms, and there's actually a few different categories of this line of evidence. First, there's embryological homology, which is where during development, we're going to have similarities between different species. So, for example, on this slide, we are seeing different vertebrates. And all of these vertebrates, though the adult forms look very different from one another, we can see that overall their form is going to be similar as embryos. And in addition, they're going to have two specific traits. All vertebrates have tails at some point during development, and all vertebrates have gill slits at some point during development. Second, there's anatomical homology, which is where there's parts of anatomy that are similar between different organisms. Here, we are looking not just at vertebrates, but mammals in particular. So all mammals have similar anatomy, but specifically this is showing the forearm. Humans, cats, whales, and bats all use their forearm for vastly different functions. However, you can see that the same bones are all present, an upper arm bone, two lower arm bones, and then the bones of the wrists and fingers. And then third, there's biochemical homology, which is where cells and or genes have similar structure and functions. So in terms of genes, over on the left, we can find genetic similarity between humans and literally any other organism. For the things that are more closely related to us, are going to have a higher genetic similarity. For the things that are less related to us, they'll have a lower genetic similarity. But still, as you can see, even something as far away from us as yeast, there are significant portions of our DNA, over a quarter of our DNA matches theirs. In terms of cells, all animals and all plants are going to have similar types of cells, but even animal and plant cells are mostly similar to one another with a couple exceptions. And then even these types of cells, which are called eukaryotic cells, are similar to simpler cells such as prokaryotic cells, things that bacteria or archaea have. The fourth item in this section are vestigial traits. Vestigial traits are something that no longer performs its original function. My favorite vestigial trait that humans have is actually not one on here. It is goosebumps. Our goosebumps don't really do anything for us now, but we get them when we get cold or sometimes when you're feeling emotional, like if you listen to some really good music. Other mammals also have goosebumps, but they are performing a function. For other mammals, goosebumps serve to raise their hairs. This can help to trap heat near their body, so they get goosebumps when it's cold because their hair will raise up and trap heat. Or it can also be effective in an emotional display. You can think of like when a cat gets angry and all of its hair raises up. So we are still having this trait respond in the same way as other mammals, but it is not actually serving a purpose for us any longer. Our third category of evidence is that the fossil record will show that there are other organisms with human traits, and over time they become more and more human-like. There are many examples of human-like fossils in the fossil record. This is just showing a few examples of those. There are more stages that fall in between these. But over time, when we date these fossils, we can see that their physical traits of the skeletons are becoming more and more like humans, as well as other traits, archaeological traits of things that we find in and around these fossils.
Human evolution is not the easiest topic of discussion in this class, but I do think that there are parts of it that can be incredible testimony builders when we take the time to think about them. And for me, the biggest thing that human evolution does for my testimony is it helps me to see connections between me and all of the other creations that are here on Earth. Sometimes these connections are kind of obvious, big, notable connections that we can see between us and other organisms. For example, if we look at any other vertebrates, like this frog here, it is a frog, like this frog here, there's so many things in common. We can find tissues, organs, a heart, a brain, eyes, a skeleton, right? All of that stuff is in common, and we can see these outward connections. But it can get even harder when we're considering organisms that are less like us, like plants, or even things that are even less like us, like bacteria. But for that, we can think about things like our DNA. We all have DNA in common, and we actually all have large stretches of our DNA in common. And so I encourage you, no matter what you're feeling about this topic now, to think about these things that you have in common with other organisms on Earth and how that connection can deepen your relationship